If we're going to eat meat, where is it coming from? We're not thinking in our full life cycle, not even here today, us talking about food and hunger. Where's our food come from today? We probably can't say. And because of that, we find ourselves in the same dilemma again. There's going to be tons of food waste, I'm sure, from here. I know I wasted food over lunch. I didn't eat my whole food package. And so we find ourselves in this position once again. So I really want us to challenge and rethink how we're looking at things. What is it that we need to do to enable people to grow food and provide for their families? What is it that we can do to enable people to be part of the solution rather than receiving handouts or us thinking for them? What is it that we need to do to be part of a radical solution, the right to food as a cultural and faith issue? There's a crisis around how we think about food, how we respond to the urgent needs of our communities, and the way that government policies right across the board are impacting food access. So there's that interlinkage between how we're growing food, industrialization of food models, and the environment, and the lack of appreciation for indigenous foods and their value. It just doesn't come up. How do we see highly nutritious foods? How do we respect the foods of our country? I bet you most of us can't even say. Maybe we can remember what our grandmothers fed us, but that's not what you'd find in our fridges if you went home and looked at what we're eating now. And I have to say, you know, as a faith-based environmental justice NGO, the devil remains in the detail on all of these issues. Every decision that's made, and oftentimes we can point fingers at the government, absolutely. These have a huge, direct, and disproportionate impact on those who are already finding it impossible to feed their families. And they're having to make decisions around whether they put food on their table or they can afford to buy electricity, whether they can travel to work or whether they can buy toiletries. These are basic things that were happening even before COVID, so you can imagine the state of society now. And I do want to just touch on energy. With Eskom planning another 40% hike in our electricity tariff, 40%. That's on top of double-digit increases for the past 5 years. How on earth is anyone supposed to be able to afford that? And that directly impacts into our food systems. Make no mistake, if government allows our parastatals to push their mismanagement and poor conduct into our pockets, we are not going to be able to solve this food crisis problem. So as long as we continue to, on top of allowing Eskom to do that, choices around energy systems, you'll see that NGOs, oh gosh, there's a sign, what was it, 2 minutes? You'll see that NGOs like SAFSI are in courts all the time. What are we battling? Car-powered ships. What are we battling? Gas exploration off the coast. What are we battling? Nuclear energy. Do you know how much that costs? Do you know how better that could be, where better that money could be spent if we were really serious about addressing poverty and addressing the issues that we're facing in terms of the right to food? I've run out of time, but I do want to say I accept and I commit myself to being part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Ms. Francesca de Gasparis, Executive Director, Southern African Faith Communities Environmental Institute, and also correcting us that this is broader faith, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, ma'am, because not the entire faith community was involved in what I mentioned, and I do know that the Catholic group, for example, opted for liberation theology and trying to be part of the solution. But thank you for that. Dr. Linda Ncube Nkomo is online. Will you take the floor, ma'am? Pardon? Okay. Then we have one of our own, Mr. Kopano Libele, founder and chairperson of Matisse Hunger and Food Insecurity Workstream, Stellenbosch University, an initiative that comes from social justice cafes and Nelson Mandela lecture last year, where students said, hey, guys, there's a problem of hunger here. Mr. Lebelesa, thanks. Take the floor.
Thank you very much, Prof. Good afternoon to everyone. All protocol observed. The interconnected nature of the right to food in South African universities. I'll begin with relevance. Universities are the microcosm of society, reflecting the broader social dynamics and challenges of society. The relevance of the right to food within these institutions cannot be overstated. Students are at a critical juncture in their lives, and access to adequate nutrition is fundamental to their academic performance, mental, and overall well-being. Moreover, universities often serve as the center for social innovation and policy development. By addressing food insecurity within campuses, universities can model best practices, conduct impactful research, and advocate systematic changes that extend beyond academic walls into active living social justice change. What are the most vulnerable what makes students vulnerable to hunger exposure in universities in South Africa? Well, institutions located in economically disadvantaged areas or those serving predominantly low-income student populations are particularly vulnerable to issues of student hunger. For example, universities such as the University of Johannesburg, the University of KwaZulu-Natal, for an example, cater to a significantly large number of students who come from a background of indigent or underprivileged backgrounds. Such students are more vulnerable to hunger exposure. Now, why is it that South African students are vulnerable to hunger? There are several factors that contribute to the vulnerability of South African students to hunger, notwithstanding the socio-economic as well as limited access to social support services, which were mentioned earlier throughout the day. A lot of the time, students have to face the following in order to make ends meet. Students often engage in part-time employment, which brings the challenge of balancing academic life with student life, which is often necessary to meet the student's own personal supply needs. However, irregular hours make the consistency of income more scarce and more difficult and unstable to maintain. There's the issue of stigma and awareness. The stigma associated with seeking assistance and a lack of awareness for available resources to prevent a student's exposure to hunger is also a challenge to students in South African universities. Now, what are the solutions that we propose? Addressing hunger among South African universities requires a multifaceted approach, contributing immediate support with long-term strategies. Food assistance programs established in campuses, such as food banks, subsidized meal plans can provide immediate relief to students in need. For example, University of Cape Town has a food pantry initiative which offers groceries to students facing food insecurity. There could also be scholarship programs and financial aid, expanding scholarships for emergency financial aid to address economic pressure and relieve exposure to hunger. And number 3, partnerships with local organizations, which cannot be overstated and has been stated throughout today. Partnership with local organizations, collaborations with NGOs and community organizations to enhance effective food assistance programs for example, the University of the Witwatersrand is in collaboration with the local food charities in that area, and they distribute food meals to their students. I am proud to announce to you this afternoon that Stellenbosch University launched its first ever food security initiative, which was launched on the 31st of July, 2024. The Marty's Food and Insecurity Workstream, for which I am the founder and chairperson, is proud of this achievement. But in the words of Nelson Mandela, whenever you surmount one hill, you then realize there's many other hills that need to be surmounted afterwards. So now that we've been able to hit the ground in establishing a platform wherein students who are exposed to food insecurity are able to alleviate their exposure by access to a free meal a day, we then are faced with the challenge of how do we make this sustainable? How do we make sure the food provided is nutritious? And how do we make sure that we secure long-term partnerships and sponsorships to make this project extend beyond our tenure? My time is up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kopano, and for the work that your team is doing, which is a student-led process with the support of the university. Our last and final panelist is co-founder and activist, South African Food Sovereignty Campaign. You would have seen these documents that they have given us. They are proposing a Food Sovereignty Act, and his name is Dr. Vishwas Sedka.
Thank you.
Okay, over to you, sir.
Thank you. I did prepare some slides, but I'm not going to use them. Because I actually wanted to bring the voices and the faces of our activists into this conversation. But because of time, I'm going to change tack. And so I'm just going to make 3 points. The one is a conceptual one about food sovereignty. The other is about the crisis of how we think hunger. And the third is about the kind of solutions we are championing to realize the right to food. Now, when COVID-19 hit our country, government worked with the food security approach to the problem. The assumption was that, yes, Agri-SA and our supermarkets, et cetera, feed this country so we can lock everyone away and they'll get their food from the supermarkets. Now, that was very, very flawed. 70% of poor households in our country get their food locally, from informal traders, from gardens, et cetera. In addition, they locked down small-scale fishers. There's over 70,000 of them, coast to coast. And those small-scale fishers feed their families, they feed their households, they feed their communities. So the point I'm making is that food sovereignty conceptually is about inequality, food inequality. That's what we need to be talking about. Food inequality is a relational concept, okay? Food security is not, actually. Food inequality asks us to think about where's income going, and as a result, who is eating, and those that don't have income, what are they eating and how are they surviving? What is the power relations in our food system? What is the power relations in society? My t-shirt says, hunger is social and climate justice. So Prof. Thuli, I'm just adding another inflection to the conversation. We cannot think about the food challenge and hunger just in terms of social justice. It's also got to be climate justice. We are living on a new planet. Since 2015, when we overshot 1 degree Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. And increasingly, our food systems, which are globalized, very fragile, and so on, are registering negative impacts on those that don't have. So during our campaigning, when we marched, had a bread march in Johannesburg, we had a hunger tribunal with the Human Rights Commission in 2015, it became very, very clear to us that food price increases because of the drought was having a disproportionate impact. And that means climate injustice. So we really have to bring that into our frame of thinking. The other quick point that I will make about the t-shirt is we have a history of famine in this country, and we don't talk about it. It's a silence. Under apartheid, actually, we had several famines in the making of a very colonial food system. We'll never know the deleterious harm and suffering because it was not documented. Today in South Africa, 80% of maize meal production goes where, ladies and gentlemen? It goes to livestock feed, while 17 million people are hungry in our country. Now that's an irrationality, and that's an unacceptable paradox. So again, food sovereignty is forcing us to think in systemic terms and how to transform the system. Second point, very quickly, around the crisis of how we think the food system. Ladies and gentlemen, 27 million people are facing starvation right now as we speak in Southern Africa. 5 governments are in a state of food emergency. And that's because of a drought, a serious, serious drought. Between 2014 and 2021, 40 million people were in food stress in Southern Africa. Again, a drought linked to climate. And the first climate famine we had, ladies and gentlemen, was where? Was in Madagascar in 2021. 400,000 people impacted, almost 1 million in food stress. This is the new realities that we are facing. We are seeing increasingly what I would call asynchronous collapses, meaning a thing like a drought can push a food system over. That's what's happening in the world. Bread baskets are shrinking, ladies and gentlemen. I have a project on climate famines right now, and I'm studying this stuff. But the other point to make is asynchronous collapses. Deeply globalized food systems have been through various shocks. 2009, how many minutes is that? Yes, 2000, I can't see with my glasses. Okay, and so on. The final point I'll make is to address the collapsing irrationalities that we are dealing with, the deleterious consequences. We need deep thinking, we need deep solutions. And this is what the Food Sovereignty Campaign is all about. This act is about a triple transition of our food system. It's calling for a public commons partnership, not a public-private partnership. And there's a place for everyone in our food system. This policy is really about how we build in the everyday, pathways in our communities, villages, towns, and cities, and validate local indigenous knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're not going to be able to hear from our colleague, Dr. Linda Ncube. I hear that she is in China and she's struggling to connect. That is the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. Fortunately, we've heard quite a lot from people representing child hunger and the need for child food security starting from pregnancy. If she's able to join us whenever, that will be fine. Can we have, as done in the previous one, 4 people line up here who want to ask or to engage? You don't have to ask the panel a question. You can just add a dimension that you think will help us collectively in taking this process forward. Just leave enough time. We're going to give everyone 90 seconds to respond to everything that would have been said and give you final, maybe 2 minutes. Sorry, 2 minutes to respond and just regroup if there's something you've wanted to say but you are not able to say in your first round, okay? Please go for it. And kindly just announce your name as you speak and proceed. Thank you. Oh, I think you're supposed to go up there.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Okay.
My name is Jabbar Mohammed. I work for Deaf SA as a provincial director in the Western Cape region. I'm also a part-time TV presenter and producer. I've got a 2-part question. My first question is, for the political representatives here, with human rights, what do you think you've done in terms of the zero hunger related to disability and specifically the deaf sector? Because you haven't mentioned what is being done in the disability sector for that. And then second part of my question, then for those that are not politically inclined or the NGO representatives and institutions, how do you serve your communities that are disabled? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Just flag the question. Over, ma'am.
Hi everyone. So I refer to myself as the vessel of those that are not here, which are children and young people. And on that note, I think I'm doing that. My name is Masaki Maleka, and I'm doing that through the Sustainability Institute. And we do it on a more practical level and less of a theoretical level. Thank you everyone that addressed this in the 5 minutes and actually included our young ones. My question actually goes to Honorable Cameron Dugmore to please elaborate more on the school nutrition program point within the integrated approach.
Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica Bornman. I'm just an ordinary citizen. And my question is directed at the members of Parliament on the panel. Over the past 2 days, I've learned so much, but most especially two things. One is that hunger is man-made, and two is that poverty, and by extension, therefore, hunger, is a political choice. And that means that our politicians choose to have hungry people as their constituents. Yesterday, in one of the parallel sessions, Dr. Greg Munro told us about Burkina Faso, who reduced severe child food poverty from 67% to 32% in just 10 years. 10 years. In 10 years, Nepal cut severe child food poverty from 20% to 8%. Peru has kept it below 5% despite their prolonged economic decline, and Rwanda reduced it from 20% to 12%. These countries give me hope. And here's my question. As parliamentarians, you have more power than other people in this room to effect policy change. Are any of you actively engaging with countries like Burkina Faso, Nepal, Rwanda, and Brazil to learn from their successful strategies? And if not, why not? What are the barriers preventing such collaborations? Thank you.
Please state your name.
I'm Erica Bornman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Nkanye Sokhadebe. I think from the latter speaker that just came here, my question is also similar, which is more on the political will from the GNU representatives that are here to address zero hunger. I think just to also add one country, President Lula from Brazil, I think is also one of the examples that I think we have learned. So I think the question is there a political will to achieve zero hunger? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Prof.
Start with your name, please,
Oh,
sir.
cool, sorry. My name is Tsepo Kikine from the University of Stellenbosch. I guess I just want to frame the question in terms of what I heard now with all the honorable people from all the political parties is that they know that there's an issue and that Prof. Madonsela is doing this summit. So my question is there any solutions that we're coming up with today? I'm starting to feel like academia is now a bubble where people just push out papers for their own agenda, and then politicians are just sitting on a playground blaming each other for stuff that they can't do because everybody knows what's going on. So how do we move forward? All of you know the problem, but somehow you're not speaking to each other. You're not agreeing on a solution.
Right.
So I'm guessing that by 2030 we'll still be hungry.
Right. Thank you, sir. Ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Lulu Kumalo. I'm from Tiger Brands. It's very unusual to get corporates to come up front to appeal for support. We run a very great program called Plates for Days, where we provide nutritious food hampers to university students at 7 universities across 14 campuses in South Africa. We are struggling as a company to meet the demand. In fact, Prof, the University of Stellenbosch is probably number 7 on the queue of universities who want to join the program. My appeal is for partnerships, and particularly with government representatives or those who are in the government of national unity. We really need to get this student hunger issue on tables, around the table for discussion. It's a very serious issue, and I'm coming from a corporate saying we're struggling. We're the only one that is playing in this space, and the need is so dire for our young people. If we talk about the future of our economy, we depend on these young people, and these are people that are going to be future employees for any organization in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Colleagues, our last intervener is going to be our Her Excellency, the Turkish Ambassador. Please, over there, ma'am, you have a minute. And thereafter, in order of your seating, distinguished panelists, we're going to start. We started this way. Is it okay if we start that way now? Right. Please just prepare your 1.5 minute closing statements and respond to any question that you want before the owner of today kicks me out of the platform. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. So we have all benefited from these 2 days. We have heard a lot about the definition of the problem. We have heard a lot about ideas for solutions. But just when I was thinking about Women's Month, I would suggest, let's start to walk the talk. Let's say on Women's Month, do you remember women talking to women all over the place, awarding each other, and while women should be in a space like that, talking to men, it should be the other way around, or men who are not heard well enough talking to women. And how about empowering the boy child so we get rid of GBV in this country, because it is the boys that we raise. So like that, instead of all that talk during Women's Month, I had suggested, let's launch or open a project every single day of the month. Let's have NGOs, NPOs, government and corporate SA, and multilateral organizations race with each other, compete with each other to do projects and to announce their projects instead of talking, because we know what kind of projects are needed. So coming to food security and eradicating hunger, I'm thinking about this. Why don't we, so carrying it forward is what? Of course, you do projects all the time, and of course, if possible, coordinate with each other. FAO is doing almost the same thing like the Turkish embassy is doing. Most of our embassies, especially European ones, have development cooperation organizations, like the Turkish one, TICA, there's JICA, there's GIZ, there's the French Development Agency. What are they doing on the ground? The things that you guys are doing, most of you, on the ground. So, in that respect, coming to the school nutrition program, I had talked about it in the panel a little bit, and we heard today like 83%. The government is taking care of 83% of the school children when feeding them for lunch. So there are certain facts. Some public schools do not have kitchens. Then you won't be able to have that hot food cooked. Some have kitchens. So the solution we devised at the time, and I learned FAO and the others are doing it, you plant, you give them greenhouses or plant the vegetables and the fruit trees. They grow it there, the children know about subsistence agriculture, and then you cook it in the kitchens. For the schools that do not have kitchens, you give them, donate prefabricated kitchens. We did that too. So in that respect, instead of paying all that money, the government can pay only for the seedlings and for the training of the greenhouses. I have seen them after we have finished the project, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years afterwards, it's still going on.
Right.
They can be subsistent, it can be enough for them. So I'm thinking, let's try to multiply such projects and give much more importance to school nutrition program in South Africa today. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Much appreciated. Esteemed Palinus, we basically have gotten a sense that there's generally some consensus around the human rights dimension of food security and ending hunger. What we haven't heard much is whether you do think it's a social justice issue and whether you do believe that everyone has a duty, including yourselves. And then there was a specific question on the floor on what are you committing to do starting from today. So, Honorable Maimane, sir, I'm not going to then, when Honorable Maimane, I will just say thank you, sir. I'm not going to call you by name again, so that we save the time. Okay, over to you, sir. Pardon?
I will literally try to brief as best as I can.
Right.
There we go. 90 seconds, here we go. During COVID, we set up an organization called One South Africa. We went out of our way to try and raise through corporates an ability to feed citizens who were immediately out of work. We did about 1.8 million meals, and I accept the point that it's not enough. I'm merely responding to the question about whether there's political will or there's a desire to actually do something. We then took that on, and on the board of our organization, we have a chairperson who leads a bread manufacturing company, and we've become very deliberate about intervening in townships with regards to not only the commercial value of bread, but making sure that it's distributed easily. I have equally so wanted to reach to the Competition Commission to say it doesn't make sense that big parties, big brands are able to drop bread into townships where some of the citizens are most vulnerable at lesser prices than they would at spaza shops, because the distribution networks of spaza shops is far higher than those of ShopRite, etc. So we have to ensure that bread is priced in such a way that it is affordable, but more distribution points can be felt. I say that to mean that there's work being done in Parliament that is happening. Not only, sure, it's a narrow intervention, but on a broader intervention, as I chair the Portfolio Committee on Appropriations, I can assure you, to answer the question about disability, Q1 to Q2, the percentage of public procurement that was done for people with disability is less than 1%. That to me is a woeful failure. On women-owned companies, that was less than 19%. On black-owned companies, that was only at 21%. I make the point to say that public procurement has not been sufficiently used to be able to empower citizens who are most vulnerable. So is there political will? Certainly. Is there something that we commit to doing in this issue? I can attempt to deal with public policy, but force Treasury to be able to procure strategically so that ultimately where citizens are most vulnerable, there's economic activity that helps them benefit in the system. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to start off by just addressing the issue about what the NPO sector is doing, or at least our organization is doing in serving disabled communities. And yes, we do feed within disabled ECD centers and also in disabled schools. But in terms of the last speaker that spoke about the importance of community kitchens and building community gardens, there is a place for it. But what we also need to remember is that those kitchens require maintenance and upkeep. Who takes responsibility for that? Gardens are a fantastic idea. They work, but schools suffer, especially when those gardens are when people come and they steal. So we need protection for those gardens, especially during school holidays. So as an organization, yes, we believe that food insecurity or hunger is a social justice issue. We do commit to partner and collaborate. We do believe our constitution is a great document, but we have a long way to go to reach the desires of section 27 and 28. But I do believe that there is still a lot of more space within addressing the problem where corporate can come in and also play a role. Thank you.
We have an activist called Nosintu Mkameli in Namakwe in rural Eastern Cape. She's disabled. And she set up a disabled people's organization, and they are building a food sovereignty pathway. They have numerous gardens. They are recovering springs that have been lost because of water issues. And they're really attempting to end hunger by building a new food system. In terms of the future and moving things forward, we've got to think in terms of pluralizing this notion of food systems. We've got to disabuse ourselves of this idea that food systems is supermarkets and farmers and so on. No. In Kolobeni, it's part of the Wild Coast, that community is food sovereign. They take their food from the ocean commons, they farm sweet potato, yams, etc., and they are able to feed themselves. That has to be validated in how we think about food systems. These are indigenous food systems. My university feeds 1,000 students a day. We have 6 agroecology gardens. We have a communal kitchen. We have a small-scale farmers market. We are going to grow this even more so that we are not dependent on donations from the corporate sector. We are building a food commons where anybody can reach for that food, cook it, eat it, and enjoy it. Thank you. That's the future.
Thank you. I'll respond just to one or two of the questions posed to political parties. I think, first of all, Erica, I agree with you, poverty is a political choice, and budgets are political choices, and you can see a government's priorities by looking at their budget. So you don't listen to what they say, look into the budget and see what is there. And what is not there in the South African budget is adequately addressing social security in our view. And we have spent the last 5 years campaigning for the right to access to social security in the form of basic income. With regards to engaging with countries who've managed on the African continent to reduce poverty, we haven't engaged directly with the countries, but we've engaged with projects and with civil society who are involved in projects, including in the pilot project around basic income in Kenya and in Namibia, where we've seen excellent results, not only reducing poverty, but also stimulating economic growth. So that's a very brief answer to your question, Erica. Right after you, there was a question, and I'm sorry I didn't get the name, around the Government of National Unity parties and their priorities. Let me say this, that when Good engaged with the ANC about signing the Statement of Intent to form a Government of National Unity, is my time up? I need to make this point. What we found in the framework is that social security was absent from the framework, as was spatial transformation, and we signed the agreement only when those two things were included. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ma'am, Doc?
There is a saying that a child's name is today, and I commit myself never to forget that while we talk, there is the slow destruction of human potential by hunger going on out in our communities. And my commitment is to continue to address that in action every day. I also want to answer regarding disability. In addition to the other challenges that disabled children are facing, there is also a great challenge when it comes to nutrition, because it's often very difficult to feed a malnourished child. And our mentor mothers are very aware of that. It takes extra patient, extra nutritious food, and they need to be fully included in any intervention.
Thank you, John.
South Africans work together very well when it comes to disasters and pandemics. We've seen that during COVID. And I'm pleading with everyone here that let's treat stunting and malnutrition as a pandemic. And let's work together. This is everybody's business.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. I just want to repeat something that we keep hearing, is that the hunger issue is not about production, but it's about access. So we don't need to follow the narrative that says that our food system needs to continue to be high input, high output models. The industrialized farming system is not necessary. SAFC has a campaign asking donors from overseas to stop funding industrial farming models in Africa and instead put the power back in the hands of the communities, invest in different food systems that support agroecology, that builds climate resilience in harmony with nature, and increase access. This will increase access to nutritious, appropriate local foods that have mostly fallen off our plates and our tables. These foods have essential nutrients and minerals that are necessary for healthy development for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Yes, I also just want to touch on a couple of the questions regarding to the international stakeholders. So as a party, we are constantly engaging with various international stakeholders, and there's a fair amount of those processes and programs that are implemented through the local authorities as well as the provincial authorities where the DA govern. And then I want to agree with the previous speaker where she said that the problem is not necessarily with the production but with regards to the access. And I want to say that Premier Alan Winde is known as the Premier for Jobs. So access to jobs and getting people to the economy easier, and sorting out the fuel levy, the fuel levy crisis will have a major impact on the exorbitant food inflation. Then with regards to political will, I think the the government of national unity is a perfect example of the political will. It is certainly a challenging task for all political parties involved, but the voices of the people that voted was heard, and now it is up, and the responsibility sits with the political parties to work together and to serve the needs of all the communities. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Prof, I think we need to bear in mind the starting point that this issue of the SDG goal and attaining it, zero hunger, happens in a context where our country has deep class divisions. We have a patriarchal society. The racial discrimination and that legacy of colonialism remains with us. And we cannot wipe those issues away when we look at solutions. So I do believe there is that commitment in the issue of government of national unity. The President has talked about the second apex priority. When we talk about fighting poverty and reducing the cost of living, that's clearly where the meeting of this SDG goal fits in. But, I mean, Brett referred to the statement of intent. Now, if you look at the statement of intent signed by the GNU parties, there are very strong provisions there in regard to redress. My colleague from the DA is next to me. There are 9 other parties in the GNU. But for instance, in this debate, the issue of access to land, I would argue that land expropriation in terms of the Constitution is about redress. And therefore, there shouldn't be any issue, in my view, in terms of GNU parties supporting that, and if it happens within the framework of the Constitution. But that doesn't mean that municipalities with land, I see later on we're having someone from a municipal perspective, local commonage, etc., are absolutely critical to create local food markets. The school nutrition program, there was a question about that. I think the integration is, we have quintiles in our schools based on most poor to least poor. But in addition to the school nutrition program, there's subsidized learner transport. Some of the families are benefiting from the child support grant. I think there's a general consensus that part of dealing with this challenge is moving towards a basic income grant. And we also have the social wage coming into effect at schools through no-fee schools. So those integrated with primary school nutrition, I think are part of that broader social package. The problem, and I think Ingrid raised that issue, I think the real issue is South Africa is not food insecure at a national level. It's only Morocco, I've heard in the context of the African context, that is more food. The problem is the household food insecurity and the hunger. That is the issue. So, and then the issue of nutrition. So access to food and what you said about mothers, both pre-birth and after birth. She made a practical proposal. She said 70,000 community health workers working amongst women and children. What an incredible impact that could make, even in the context of inequality in household food security. So that's for me a very practical thing. Disability, I just want to invite the person who asked that. It's Disability Month. We're having our minister doing a debate in Parliament. I don't think we're doing enough. You can say we've got set-asides with equity for people living with disability, but there's so much more, and we would like that sector, we'll invite them when it will be programmed, the debate on disability. African examples, I think this booklet that we were given is incredible. It refers to Africa Agenda, the 2063, and your examples that you raised about those other countries. We're very involved in the AU, and I think that's where I've made a note of the countries you mentioned, but clearly we have to do. But I must say, I want to be proudly South African that our social net, our pensions, the social wage, NSFAS, we actually are leading on the continent in terms of what we actually are providing as a country. And that's an example. Lastly, I've referred to, I think, the practical examples. I've picked up a few here. Musi Maimane, who chairs appropriations, it does come down to the budget, but I repeat, change comes from leadership, the will, it comes from social mobilization, and it comes from capabilities. And I think that's what we need to take forward.
Thank you, sir. Sure. Mr. Limala.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think it's been gainsaid that right to food is a fundamental human right. And everyone that is here has echoed the need and echoed the urgency in which is required to address this need. What needs to be done is the people who have the capacity to make an active change, such as the example made by the representative from Tiger Brands, need to be incentivized. We have key stakeholders here who are in national government who can come up with regulations, come up with ways of incentivizing, whether it's tax breaks, whether it's some way of commercially rewarding persons that get involved in institutions such as the one that I'm leading, as well as other initiatives that directly address and reduce hunger exposure and poverty exposure. The more we work in silos, it makes the work more cumbersome. I think if we work more integrated in our approach to addressing food insecurity, we'll have more greater rewards. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That concludes this session. I would like to thank the esteemed panelists for their amazing contributions. I want to believe then that there is no panelist in this room who does not accept that ending hunger is a constitutional responsibility that we all have, but in different degrees, with government having the main responsibility. And when we're talking about government, we're talking national government, provincial government, local government, and school governing boards, as well as universities. I also take it that there is a belief that we all have a role, and that role, of course, depends on the power we have and the responsibilities we have as persons and as leaders in different institutions. I'm also grateful that the panelists have made certain commitments regarding what more are they going to do to advance the social justice of eating. And in so doing, they've also indicated what they would like to do together. On the front cover of your program are words from Nelson Mandela, where he says, "We do not want freedom without bread, nor do we want bread without freedom. We must provide for all the fundamental rights and freedoms associated with a democratic society." So the understanding is, if we don't make progress in the other fundamental rights, progress on hunger will be undermined. And examples have been given us on the amount of money that is spent on transport. Somebody says here in the Western Cape, people spend 40% of their income on transport. The one case study that was brought to me during an event at the National School of Government, where we've been talking to ministers, MECs, etc., on ethics, but including justice as an ethical value. A story was brought to my attention about people in Tshwane that live under a bridge. For food, they usually do with bread and water, because they're working in people's homes in Pretoria, and the amount of money they earn does not allow them to live in Mamelodi or some other place where apartheid deemed that people like them can live. The only warm meal they get is from the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Pretoria East. They can't use tents because the people in the area, and I also have a home in Pretoria East, don't want them to create a settlement there by the bridge. So they have to carry their things. What does that say, esteemed panelists, is you are right when you're saying we don't have a food shortage issue yet. We have a food distribution issue. But you've also said that if we don't address climate change and other inefficiencies, we will have a food shortage issue. So thank you, esteemed guests, and I hope that we will approach you again to ask you to convert those commitments into pledges, so that when we meet next year, we don't discuss again what is the problem. We just discuss how have we individually and collectively shifted the needle. Thank you. We have to give you this. What happened to that?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're moving swiftly and swimmingly along with the program. Another round of applause to this wonderful panel, moderated by Professor Madonsela. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Musi. Thank you, Petrina. Thank you, Sandile, Nokwanele, Ingrid, Francesca, Vishwas, Moshe, and Kupano. Thank you very, very much. There seems to be. Hello.
It's probably muted. Yeah, just go for this one.
There seems to be some lost property from the previous panel. I've got a 5-year-old child that I have to ask when he gets into the car, where's this? Where's this? Who does this belong to? Ah, Professor Vishwas. Pleasure. Some more lost property. Cameron, where are you? You were sitting here. Cameron Dugmore, lost property. This looks like yours. Anybody up for a leather handbag? Anybody keen for a leather handbag? There's something inside here. Oh. Lost property is a bag. It's quite a heavy bag. I don't know what's inside. You want to take a chance and bid for the bag? Bid for the bag. Who wants to bid for the bag? Bid for the bag, bid for the bag, bid for the bag, bid for the bag, bid for the bag. Lost property, no one wants to claim it. Bid for the bag, bid for the bag. How much? 10,000, I've got 10,000 over here, 10,000 over here, 10,000 over here, 10,000. Dude, we got 10,000, what, 35? 30? Oh, we got 35 here, 35 here, 35 here, 35 here. Anybody wants? We got 35,000 here, 35,000 here, 35,000. Anybody wants? 100,000 up there. To the lady, going once, going twice. R1 million for the bag, yeah. Guys, what is in this bag? And why is nobody wanting to claim it? Better not explode anytime soon, yeah? Ladies and gentlemen, clearly I'm not going to get anybody's attention here. Let's take a 5-minute break, which will replace tea. Okay, clearly not. Okay, I beg your pardon. We've got somebody to claim the bag. Mr. Chris Nissen has to go very soon, so let's take the session now, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know what's going on over there. Can we go, please, with the next session? Let me come and call my next guests. We've got the final plenary, which is thematic areas, plenary panel 3. I'll moderate that one. We've got Professor Madonsela, who's going to be part of that. We got the chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, Mr. Chris Nissen, who has to be part of that and soon after take leave. We've got Luke Metterlekamp, Senior Program Officer, Urban Systems, Local Governments for Sustainability. We got Dr. Nyasha Magadzire, Lead Food Systems Researcher, Center for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch. As I call your name, please come to the stage. We've got John T. Cogger, an attorney with Ndifunu Kwazi, and chairperson for the Commission for Gender Equality Advocate, Ndabi Seng Mokhale, who's joining in virtually. Been waiting for a while, so we have to get this panel going, and we have to get this panel going now. Please, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask that we settle down. Lady, gentlemen, can we ask that we settle down when we take leave and continue the conversation, please? Yes, Prof. Could we all please settle down? We are going now to the final plenary. All of my members, whose names I've called out, are all on stage. As has become custom now, so we have to recover a bit of time. So with your leave, fellow panelists, Mr. Nissen, you're going to set the tone for me, sir. 7 minutes, Mr. Nissen. Even better. I don't want to say that out loud. Okay, so we're bidding for the lowest numbers here. Prof. Madonsela has just whispered to me she's got 5 minutes and that's enough. Mr. Nisen has said 5 minutes, that's enough. Anybody want to go for 4 minutes? Ladies and gents, we've done well. Prof, I'm going to sort you out just now. There we are, ma. Thematic areas. 7 minutes, presentations. Here, we might have more scope for deep questions, but I'm not making the mistake I made the last time. And you know what mistake I made. I said I want 3 questions, I had 4 questions, and that changed my time. So I apologize again for that. I now have to recover the time, and we're going to make time up. Of course, we have to make swift of this panel because I have a guest who's on the virtual platform who has to take leave and also has been waiting. And I've got Mr. Nisen who has to bounce pretty quickly. So, Mr. Nisen, you can sit there, you can come here, sir. As you are comfortable, fellow panelists, take it away. The lady at the back over there will raise her arm just to confirm that you probably need to cut. We haven't had to play music at all today. I don't intend to play music, but it is there. So, Mr. Nisen, go for it. A round of applause, please. Chairperson of the Human Rights Commission.
Program Director, fellow panelists, Prof, Advocate Madonsela, and to all of you, my apologies that I have to leave early. I have been involved with the homeless people here. As you know, there was a court order by the Public Works Department to move people around the castle. I was there yesterday and today, so my apologies, I've just been involved with them. Not only them, but we went to another community in New Orleans, also ex-farm workers that have been under threat, been caught in that matter. My apologies, I knew I was invited to be part of the beginning, but I was on my way to Gambia, to the African Commission, but we had to appear before Parliament the last 2 days. So my apologies, and I'm standing in for Commissioner Kwinana, who is one of the commissioners of the Human Rights Commission. We have sent to you a brief that was prepared by Commissioner Kwinana for your records. But I just want to raise 3 things, and please, if I'm controversial, don't worry, I'm always controversial. So the first thing, yes, we talk about the accessibility, national and so on. I just want to raise about 3 things. The first thing is food prices. That's the elephant in this room. And when you look at food prices, you then need to go and look at the annual reports of food processing companies and retailers. Have a look at that. And you see the amount of dividends paid out to shareholders. And you look at what executives are earning. I do not have to remind you about a certain company where one person, a retailer, he earns about 80 million rand a year. So food prices is the one issue that we need to look at. Because you can't talk about food security when our people cannot afford buying food. We have just engaged in an inquiry into people buying the foods from Spaza shop with low quality, low quality, and make them sick and make them to die. So that's the first thing you need to look when you talk about food security in this country and hunger. The second issue that we need to talk about is the political will in this country. I've listened to the political parties now telling us what they're going to do and how they're going to do things. It is really an issue about where a government, if it's worth of anything, comes to and say food is a right and access to food is a right. So we need a political will. Whether that political will is being demonstrated now, we need to be seen to that happen. The third thing is we all talk about food gardens. I grew up in a township, Bishop Lavis, where we had food gardens. All the food gardens were there. I lived in Limpopo. Tell me a place in the country where I haven't lived, where I've seen food gardens happening. even Emaxhosa in Pairu Eslalin. But what we have today in our townships, food gardens have given way for people renting out space in their yards. So you have Wendy houses have taken the space of food gardens. And so you better get 3,000 rand than having to have a food garden because of the lack of housing and the lack of land in our country, in our spaces. So I'm sorry I can go on, but I'll end here. Those are the three things I want to raise with you. But lastly, the right to food is enshrined in the Constitution. The right to decent living. Prof, the former Chancellor Rector of Salt Plaatje Museum was telling me about 4 years ago that 3 out of 10 children in the Northern Cape are dying of hunger. Not malnutrition, hunger. Hunger is a reality in this country. We need the political will. We need the government that says we are serious of ending starvation in our country. Thank you so much.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Nissen. Much appreciated. Let's go to the virtual platform, please, where the chairperson for the Commission for Gender Equality is tuned in, Advocate Mogale. Thank you so much, Advocate Mogale, for your patience and indulgence to date, and we certainly welcome your thoughts here now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Certainly we can. Thank you, ma'am.
Oh, okay, thanks. I was just about to toy if you had not me, trust me. Thanks. I was asked to speak on the issue of the intersectionality of the right to food and our human rights in South Africa. So I'll focus on that, and I'm just glad that my colleague Mfundisi Nissen there has actually set a beautiful tone. Let me start by thanking everyone for invitation to participate in the 6th summit. The theme for this year, SDG 2, Zero Hunger, which demands a progressively realizable eradication of hunger by 2030, is a very relevant and necessary one. Thank you, Professor Madonsela and your team for actually going into that space that somehow is actually left to NGOs and to other people. I think we need to bring it to the center of the table. A job well done. The goal expressly says we should end poverty in all forms and dimensions by 2030. There's a school of thought that says the goals are very ambitious and bold. This is another way of saying maybe they are unachievable or the time frames are unrealistic. We in South Africa, with the constitution that we have, we should not even consider such views. From the preamble of our constitution to the Bill of Rights and beyond, we have pledged to achieve this SDG and more. And Reverend Nissen there has actually just put it so aptly. We don't have a choice. We've got to go there. We've got to achieve this. The right to food in South Africa is directly linked to the vision captured in the Constitution. The preamble of our Constitution provides a solid value base for us as a people. It uses inclusive language that affirms equality despite recognized differences. Our preamble affirms those who have worked to build and develop our country. Although some people interpret this as affirming those who invested into development, the sentiment here covers those who, through their blood and sweat, built the country and helped usher democracy. One of the most profound statements in our preamble, one of the other profound statements, is that we therefore adopt this constitution as the supreme law to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. So us being here today to talk about social justice is actually us going back to to the drawing board where it all started, to look at the key areas that our constitution is based on: democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Those fundamental human rights referred to include Section 9, which talks about equality, Section 10, human dignity, Section 11, right to life, Section 12, freedom of security of the person. The question then becomes, why with these provisions in our Constitution do we have so much hunger and poverty in our midst? How is it that we are in a country where going to school is not about education mainly, but the sole and basic meal for some of our children? Our levels of hunger are such that some children get their only meal for the day at school. What then happens to those children over weekends and during school holidays? But the biggest question here should be, what was their situation before they started school? According to a UCT study entitled Undernutrition in Children, Children Count, 25% of girls and 30% of boys start school already carrying the burden of and effects of malnutrition and stunted growth. This sadly means that there's more malnutrition and stunting in rural areas than urban areas. This unfortunately is not surprising. There is arguably more food acquisition opportunities. This has got nothing to do with dignity. It's food acquisition opportunities. It's rummaging through dustbins. It's snatching things from shops and all the places where people can actually get their next meal. So this is food, there's more food acquisition opportunities in urban areas than rural areas. Unfortunately, in South Africa, there's no guarantee that once these children start school, they will at least get one meal a day until they finish school. The high school dropout means sooner rather than later, a significant number of those who started as malnourished and stunted drop out and go back to abject poverty. According to Stats SA, in 2021, nearly 3% of 15-year-olds and 9% of 17-year-olds dropped out of school. Statistics further show that out of 100 learners who start school in grade 1, only 40 will finish grade 12. A whopping 60% fall by the wayside during the 12 years. They to a large extent fall into malnutrition and poverty. Let us also consider the sanitary wear period poverty that results in some learners missing a significant amount of school annually and ultimately dropping out. This situation means that these young girls, teenagers to be specific, who spend a considerable period in 1 month without proper nutrition, if they fall in the category of those who rely on school feeding schemes to get food. So we have our young people with the choice of saying, do I go to school to have a meal and spend 3, 4, up to 7 days, very uncomfortable, embarrassing myself, sometimes humiliating, and be bullied because I will not be able to stand up from my desk during break or play or do all sorts of things because I am not confident with how I have secured myself during this period, this time when I am having my period. Those are the challenges that our young girls face today. This means we are highly likely to have a young adult in South Africa who is uneducated, whose self-worth is seriously compromised, who then becomes untrainable with limited employable and trainable prospects and ultimately disappears into the poverty and hunger they've always been in anyway, but the system failed to help them escape. This then undermines all those rights in the Bill of Rights, but I will amplify the ones that I've mentioned above. Equality. The Equality Clause says everyone is equal before the law and has a right to equal protection and benefit of the law. Equality includes the full and equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. It is clear that not everyone has the full and equal enjoyment of all the rights and freedoms. Right to education, amongst others, in the situation that I have just outlined, is compromised. Yet further down in Section 29 of the Bill of Rights, it says everyone has a right to basic education, including adult basic education. Who would be interested to even go back as an adult if their experience was so dehumanizing and traumatic when they were teenagers? Section 10, which talks about human dignity, says when you as an adult cannot feed your family, rely on and depend on the school to feed your children, where is the dignity there? When, as a parent, you cannot give your teenage daughter the first pack of sanitary towels because you cannot afford to buy them, how does that impact on the inherent dignity as a parent that is outlined in the Constitution? Section 11 says everyone has a right to life. In the judgment of State versus Makwanyane and others, 1995, the late Judge Yvonne Mokgoro brought the concept of Ubuntu forward as an integral part of the constitutional values and principles that inform interpretation of the Bill of Rights, and therefore the interpretation of our human rights fabric. This means I cannot enjoy my rights to life with full food security, amongst other benefits, when my fellow citizens cannot. The key values of group solidarity, compassion, respect, human dignity, equality to basic norms, and collective unity, as enveloped in the concept of Ubuntu, require us to be restless and concerned when some of us are experiencing their human rights differently. When we say we, the people of South Africa, believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, they are united in our diversity, we must always be unsettled that there are those who up to now are still in a society that is adversely different from ours, not equally protected by the law, whose quality of life has not improved, whose potential has not been unleashed, and therefore are unable to take their rightful place as citizens of this country. Hunger is a challenge that we all must face and we all must bring forward solutions to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Mogale, Chairperson of the Gender Commission. I do understand that Advocate Mogale has to take leave probably during the course of the session. Ma'am, if you can just indicate just before you leave so that we can bid our formal farewells to you and extend by extension our gratitude, we would be so indebted. We come back to the physical realm here, and simply I'm going to start closest to me and make my way all the way to the end there with you, Luke. So Advocate Madonsela, Professor Madonsela, please offer your comments in relation to the thematic areas. You can sit there, you can come up here, whichever works for you, ma'am. Would be so indebted.
Thank you, Program Director, and thank you, dear colleagues. My engagement with you is on the subject that I started with at the beginning of this conference, or at the beginning of the conference, which was not the summit. It's beyond stray bullets. Can a legislated social justice impact assessment matrix, bracket CM, anchor the right to food? We have already established that the right to food and freedom from hunger is a constitutional right. We've also established that it is an obligation under international law, and those are legal obligations. We've also established that it is a moral obligation under our commitments to the Sustainable Development Goals. What was not underscored was that it's also a moral obligation under the Copenhagen Declaration on Social Development, which links human rights, social justice, and social development. We also established earlier that there seems to be no synergy between what we have achieved regarding advancing social justice in relation to the freedom from hunger and justice of eating and our commitments. There's also no correlation between what we have invested as a country in ending hunger. We were told earlier about how we have a national school feeding system, how we have NSFAS, which contributes to student funding. We have one of the most comprehensive social assistance systems for people with disabilities, for elder persons, and now we also have the SRD grant. In the workplace, we've included those who were previously excluded, including domestic workers and farm workers. So why then the gap? But before we identify the gap, I have indicated that I want to talk to you very briefly about an instrument called SIAM. So what is social justice? Social justice, from our perspective, is justice concerned with equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. It is essentially based on embracing the humanity of every person. And this would be reflected in just, equitable, and fair distribution of all opportunities, resources, benefits, privileges, and burdens in a society. I want to just read for you what John Rawls says about the meaning of social justice, because I just think he makes it simpler than the way we have done it. Right, sorry. John Rawls says, social justice is fairness concerned with the way in which the major social institutions distribute fundamental rights and duties and determine the division of advantages from social cooperation. From our side, of course, we think that it's more than just distributing advantages. It also includes human solidarity. And our definition, of course, comes from understanding the fact that social justice is a dimension of Ubuntu, and that comes, as Advocate Sepanya said, from S versus Makwanyane. So the instrument we're offering you is called a Social Justice Impact Assessment Matrix. It has 9 dimensions, and these are the dimensions that I'm going to read for you. It simply says, before you make a decision, we heard our politicians saying, we want to do this, we want to do that, which is fine, but we're saying you might be doing that, but undermining food security through what I'm referring to as stray bullets. So the first thing is, before you decide on anything, is there constitutional objectives congruence? The second thing is, who's your target beneficiary, and disaggregate or segment your target beneficiary by race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, geography, nationality, including refugees, etc. That's just to make sure that in your good intentions, you're passing something like COVID-19 regulations to help everyone not to be infected, but the decisions you're making might just make people poor or exacerbate the poverty that already exists, and in the process, exacerbate hunger or inability to access food. And you must, the third one is, are you differentiating fairly? Because sometimes men and women need different things, people with disabilities need different things from others, refugee community might need something else, and people who are historically discriminated on the basis of race or any other human diversity factor. The fifth one is equitable advantage. Is there any group that you're giving an advantage to, and is that advantage equitable? So somebody spoke earlier about supermarkets. If you're saying to people, everyone must buy from supermarkets, everyone must buy from a digitized space, have you realized that you're killing the local economy, the spaza shops, etc., because you're forcing money to go to those who already have a lot of money, but that's not your intention. The sixth one is restitution. And this comes from Nancy Fraser's approach to social justice that says it's not enough that you recognize difference. It's not enough that you give voice to all communities, but you also have to have redress for those who are already disadvantaged because of your previous unjust actions. The seventh one would be avoidable harm. If there's another way of passing that policy that doesn't harm any social group, choose a different one. The eighth one is compensatory strategies or mitigation. if you can't avoid, as was the case with COVID-19, you can't avoid that law that you want to pass or regulation, is there a way of going compensatory strategy? And green energy has been one of the areas where we've pushed this approach, and thank God now they talk about just transition. When we started talking with them, there was no such a thing as just transition. The answer was simply, green jobs create better jobs. But even now, as you're moving with green energy, ask yourself, will local communities just become recipients of, will local communities become recipients of temporary jobs and consumership status? Or will you use your green energy approach to democratize ownership of businesses and to foster sustainable local economies? And then the last one, which is important, is meaningful engagement. What we're then asking you, fellow colleagues, is would it be best if we legislate this requirement? We've heard already that there's different approaches. Some want a transactional approach, some are looking futuristically. If we are going to make sure that nothing exacerbates inequality, nothing exacerbates poverty, nothing exacerbates hunger, and if it is going to exacerbate hunger, it is implemented with a mitigation strategy, should we not then ask that this be legislated? In some OECD countries, it is legislated. What we call anticipatory impact assessments are legislated. And that basically is my proposal to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Madonsela, much appreciated. Dr. Nyasha, I don't know if you want to sit there or you want to come here. That option is yours. I'm going to be chased off my place for a second. Okay, very well.
5 minutes also. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to Prof. Madonsela and also the Center for Social Justice. I really appreciate this opportunity to speak on a very urgent and I feel dire issue that is affecting humanity, and that is climate change. And today I would like to speak to what climate change actually means for our food production and distribution, and ultimately our aspirations to actually achieve zero hunger. As many of us are aware, SDG 2 seeks to end hunger, achieve food security, and also promote sustainable agriculture. Hunger, particularly in Africa and South Africa, has been framed mainly as an issue of access, and I've heard many assertions here throughout the day about how the issue we're facing is not that of availability. We're actually a food secure country, but I would like to challenge that and say that when we look at the impacts of climate change and production, we no longer have the privilege to keep saying that we're actually food secure and that we can continue to produce food the way that we've been doing over the last couple of years, or through these current modern ways of producing food. When we look at climate change, we see that the impacts are intensifying, and we need to begin to revisit the fundamental aspects of food security, which is food availability. We need to give serious consideration to how we will ensure food security in a world where the current ways of producing and distributing food may no longer actually be viable. So I just want to quickly touch on what exactly are these climate change impacts that we're seeing when it comes to agricultural productivity. This is nothing new, but I'll rehash it quickly. So first of all, we already see that climate change is negatively affecting yields across Africa. In the last few decades, and literally a few weeks ago, we have seen a surge in extreme weather events. These include droughts, floods, heat waves, and all manner of storms. I mean, just a few weeks ago, people were stuck in snow. And if we look around our different places, we see crop failure everywhere. In South Africa, we also are experiencing significant droughts, and these are leading to severe crop failures. But this is not a unique case to South Africa. We see it all across Africa, And FAO has been reporting that there's a significant decrease in the yields of staple crops such as maize, wheat, and rice due to erratic weather patterns. These climate shocks don't only include the reduction of yields, but they also undermine our resilience of our food and farming systems. When we look at health, the health of livestock, for example, we see that our livestock are also declining due to water scarcity and heat stress. And when we look at fisheries, which supports quite a number of people across South Africa, these resources are also being depleted as a result of the increase in ocean temperatures and also the disruption of ecosystems. All of this results in less food on the market and also an increase in food prices, leading to a greater number of people being at risk of hunger. And then we want to look at the disruption of our food supply chains and distribution as a result of climate change. Climate change just doesn't stop at production. The distribution of food is equally impacted. The infrastructure we rely on to get food from our farms to consumers is also being disrupted. Just look at all the disruption of our roads, our bridges, our storage facilities, and even the ports that bring food in from outside. In rural areas of South Africa, heavy rains have also been washing away roads, cutting off farmers from markets and consumers from food. This disproportionate impact on low-income and remote populations calls for us to actually start looking at how do we help the communities that are struggling to already access affordable and nutritious food. One alarming trend we're seeing globally and in Africa is also the rising cost of food transportation due to climate-induced disruptions. This, combined with the damage to agricultural lands and the increasing price of inputs like water and energy, makes food less accessible, more expensive for vulnerable populations. This also exacerbates existing inequalities and violates the social justice principle that everyone should have equitable access to food. And then I want to touch on the smallholder farmers, of which we understand that 3/4 of the food that we actually receive in sub-Saharan Africa comes from these small farmers. Small-scale farmers are on the front lines of climate change, yet they have very little capacity to actually adapt to climate change. Many do not have access to climate-resilient technologies, they don't have access to crop insurance, and they don't have the financial resources to actually address climate change impacts on their ability to produce food. In Africa, smallholders face the double burden of climate stress and also economic marginalization. All of this which threatens both the local food production and rural livelihoods. South Africa is not immune. In fact, smallholder farmers across Limpopo and Eastern Cape have faced crop failure and livestock losses due to prolonged droughts and inconsistent rainfall. And without proper support, many of these farmers may abandon agriculture altogether, further destabilizing our food system and making food scarcity more prevalent. All the things I've mentioned here are things that we already know, but what actually can we do? Current modes of food production and distribution are not only vulnerable to climate change, but they're also the key drivers of climate change. We already understand that agriculture is contributing to close to 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. This means that a business-as-usual approach to addressing the issue of production and distribution in the future cannot work for us. We have to rethink how we produce food and distribute food in a way that we can withstand the shocks of climate change while ensuring ecological integrity of the natural resources that we need to actually produce food. More specifically, we need to ramp up the transition towards sustainable agricultural approaches, such as agroecology, as Vishwas, who I think is gone there, has been also talking about. And we also need to move to a more localized food system as a matter of serious urgency. I'd just like to end off in saying that achieving the Zero Hunger SDG 2 will require policies that not only improve access, but also protect and enhance our ability to produce and distribute food in a changing climate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nyasha Magadzire, lead food systems researcher at the Center for Sustainability Transitions at Marties. Dr. Jonty, are you going to sit there? Are you going to come up? Oh, of course. The chairperson of the Human Rights Commission has to take leave. He's given me the wink, sir. I must shake your hand. I've thoroughly enjoyed engaging you here as well as on radio, as I'm sure it has been an honor for the members of your panel as well to be on the same platform as you. Can we please clap him off?
My humble apologies. May I just make the firm commitment, Advocate Madonsela, of the South African Human Rights Commission's continued collaboration with you and with your initiatives, and we're looking forward for further collaboration with you and with the university itself. But thank you. My apologies. I'm going on to 2 interviews now on the issue about homeless people in the city of Cape Town. My apologies. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much indeed, Mr. Nissen. Your work doesn't stop. Your thoughts here this afternoon are thoroughly appreciated. And the show certainly does go on. And Jonty, it's all yours.
Thank you. I won't evict you from your your podium. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here to have this audience to speak about the intersection between homelessness and hunger. I have the privilege of working for an organization called Indufuno Kwazi, which has the unenviable task of trying to challenge housing affordability or the lack thereof in Cape Town, but also try to redress the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. And by far one of the biggest joys, but also the biggest, I don't want to say burdens, but tiresome aspects of my job is a weekly pro bono services that we provide for people who are facing evictions, who are living on the streets. Every Tuesday and Wednesday, anyone from the public can come and get access to free legal services. And what stands out from countless consultations with clients, countless hours researching and representing clients in courts, is that poverty, homelessness, and hunger are symptoms of structural inequality. And so the types of people coming through our doors, are people living on the streets who really lack access to adequate housing, people who have a home but are being evicted because they lost their jobs, or they're going through some sort of psychosocial event in their lives which disenables them from affording their rent. Often it's related to issues outside of someone else, issues that someone can't control, which is why they are facing an eviction. And I heard somewhere that the average person is two paychecks away from homelessness. So it means that living on the streets is closer to the average person than we think. That means that living on the streets and being hungry is closer to the average person and it's a daily struggle for the average person. And so, most of our work is in Cape Town. We're a Cape Town-based organization, but coincidentally, Cape Town is also, the most unequal and spatially segregated city in South Africa. This is where colonialism started. Colonialism was perpetrated by a private company, and I want to go and also talk about the legacy of housing markets and how that is a systemic cause of continued vulnerability. But the the twin evils of apartheid is insecure housing and also unemployment. What apartheid sought to achieve was peripherally located insecure housing and a source of cheap black labor. And if you look at the structure of Cape Town, that is what you have. And so clients walking through the door have, through choices outside of themselves, decided to set up a shack on public land. That is a choice that they make out of absolute desperation. But what happens inevitably is that people are criminalized for making these extremely difficult choices in the context of structural inequality. And so we're in Cape Town right now, the CBD. The average two-bedroom apartment in the CBD and places like Sea Point and Greenpoint is between 11 and 19,000 rand per month, and that's just to rent. So in order to afford to live where we currently are, you have to have a household income of between 37,000 rand and 63,000 rand. But if you go out into the peripheral areas of Cape Town, you get rents below 5,000 rand. So, it's not a coincidence that the legacy of apartheid endures in Cape Town. The state has access to land in these areas, yet it doesn't want to use those pieces of land for affordable housing. Or if it does commit to using those parcels of land for affordable housing, the project pipeline to deliver on those promises, could take inordinately long periods of time. And yet, while people struggle to access housing, they inevitably do have to wait on the so-called waiting list. We got a judgment in an eviction case yesterday, and very dire circumstances for our client. She lived in District 6, was forcibly removed in the 70s. She lodged a claim, but unfortunately did so through a third party, and that person lost the papers, and her claim wasn't submitted to the Land Claims Commission. She's been on the waiting list 25 years. When former President Zuma reopened the land claims process in 2014, she saw an opportunity to get restitution and made another claim. It was received, but then that was subject to a Concord interdict, which meant that her claim was held in abeyance while the previous first order claims were resolved. So here, and to add insult to injury, she's being evicted because her landlord, who's a property developer, wants to renovate her house and obviously rent it out to a higher amount. So this is an extremely sad story of dispossession, not just through the states, the apartheid state as well as the post-apartheid state, but also through market forces. And what hasn't happened in the post-apartheid era is a regulation of housing affordability to ensure that people can have access to well-located affordable housing so that they can be closer to their jobs. Because inevitably it's a vicious cycle. Without access to a home, you can't have employment. And without access to, but without a job, you can't have access to a home. So, and then in the context of Cape Town, if you can't afford to live in areas like this, then you do have to live 40 kilometers away and spend 40% of your income in order to access a job that will not pay you enough in order to have a proper life. So the consequences of the legacy of apartheid and those twin sins is pervasive. Is this you? Last point. It doesn't just affect people who are on the verge of homelessness, but also people who are living on the streets. The city provides access to shelters, but they also put people in an unenviable position where they don't provide storage facilities, and most people do rely on the informal recycling economy. So then people are forced to make a choice between having access to a meager income and access to a shelter. And that, again, just reinforces the fact that apartheid is both, the legacy of apartheid is both unemployment and housing insecurity. Thank you so much.
I can't imagine having to make some of the agonizing choices that you have highlighted. Many of our citizens, unfortunately, have to. And first of all, thank you for the work that you do. It's not sexy, doesn't pay well, it's gut-wrenching at the most of times, and somebody has to do it. And thank you for grabbing the initiative and doing that. It's one way, certainly, of not just holding the institutions of state accountable, but more importantly, giving many vulnerable people a sense of dignity and self-worth. So thanks, Jonty, appreciate that. Luke, I understand. Yes, please, a warm round of applause. Dr. Meter Lakamp will have slides that he wants to speak to, so I hope that everything that he needs is available to him. Thanks, Luke. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm just going to raise this a bit. And thank you, Jonty. I mean, I think what Jonty raises is this connection between the right to the city and the right to food. And I think it's a connection which comes up really strongly and came out of the recent HLPE report, the High-Level Panel of Experts on Global Food Insecurity. It's fine. Which put the percentage of food insecure people globally living in cities at 75%. So really kind of centering this question of the urban space and food insecurity globally. So I'm going to break from script a little bit. Normally it's death by PowerPoint at these kind of events, and I'm the only one today. But what I wanted to touch on was thinking about a little bit of actually getting down to the numbers behind many of the things we've been talking about today. You know, we've been talking about agricultural support, we've been talking about the school nutrition program, we've been talking about social grants. And what we did 2 years ago was trying to do a very high-level stock take on budget expenditure allocated to the right to food. And we broke this down into 4 categories. And apologies, I was expecting a little bit of a bigger screen. But we broke it down into 4 categories. Supporting own production. So within that, we looked at support to kind of smallholder production programs and kind of land reform processes. We looked at direct food aid, so kind of provision of food to people. The National School Nutrition Program, prison meals, early childhood development subsidies, food relief, and then enabling economic access, and under that kind of largely cash transfer systems, but also VAT exemptions, which are substantial. And then enabling dietary well-being, kind of broader Department of Health activities, the actions and activities, for example, of the Competition Commission and others. And what we came to was that there's a budget allocation of roughly 9% of the national budget that goes towards ensuring the right to food. So in 2022, that was 216 billion rand. The vast majority of which, in fact, twice the total of all the other components combined, was through the social grant spending. And in establishing that figure, we looked at National Treasury estimates that estimated that 70% of social grant expenditure gets spent on food. So we didn't calculate the entire social grant value, we looked at that 70%. So that comes out at a figure of roughly 156 billion annually from social grants that get spent on food. So that, I think, was just kind of putting into context a little bit, and I think highlighting really that we are already, as a country, allocating substantial resources to this, and not to underplay that. I think also to stress that this 9% is a conservative estimate. It excludes a kind of range of critical basic services that are inextricable from the right to food, around the provision of water, provision of energy has been spoken about substantially today, the extended public works programs, the incredible example of the 70,000 community healthcare workers that we heard about today and the work that they're doing and the kind of front lines of hunger that they're working on, and a range of other activities that are underway today from the state's side. So 9% I think is conservative. And I think second to education, this would be our largest budget allocation if you looked at it this way. So I was asked to consider kind of presenting today a little bit in the context of what we've done in the last 30 years. So with that figure in mind and the kind of centrality of the social grants to this picture, and apologies for those who maybe cannot see this graph, it's a little bit small, but just tracking our social grant expenditure since 1994, and really just emphasizing that we have increased social grant expenditure quite significantly, and as a proportion of GDP, that's also gone up substantially to roughly 4% of GDP today. That, however, along with much of our other work, and I think this is a figure many of us are aware of, is based off the back of increasing debt, increasing national debt. So South Africa's national debt as a relation to GDP has also increased substantially over this period. So a lot of the social funding is debt financed, and I think we need to be real about that, and we need to think about what that means going forward and how long we can continue approaching this method of solving and addressing food insecurity through the way we have been. The rise in social grants, obviously, there's been a lot of conversation today about how the increases in grant expenditure haven't kept up with food price inflation, and I completely agree with that. However, I think I want to touch on a kind of component of this, which is, and again, just to summarize what's on the slide here, really was looking at the agricultural value chains, which is the kind of top blue section in the increase in input prices for agriculture. The middle band is what farmers essentially are getting when they sell their produce, the increase in the kind of farm gate prices, and then lastly, the increase in the retail price of food. And what comes across really strongly is that, yes, the retail price of food has gone up substantially. Farmers have not seen that benefit, and the retail price of food has only gone up a fraction of what the cost of producing food has gone up by. The balance of that cost now sits in farm debt. So we've seen an increase in the percentage, the kind of ratio of farm debt to farm asset value over the what is this, since 2017. So yes, we've seen substantial food price inflation over the last 10 years. We've only seen a portion of that real debt. And the reason I flag this is because farmers are carrying the other half of that. And we're headed for, I think, really shaky territory with this. There's only so far this can go. And we're not looking at anything close to the end of food price inflation if you kind of judge that on farm debt. I think it also really flags a huge concern, of pushing new entrants into agricultural space at this point, when a lot of large-scale, very well-established commercial farmers are going out of business. So where to? I would argue that we can't continue as we have been, with 9% of our, call it 10% of our national budget, and 156 billion rand a year just through social grants channeled into the lowest income communities across this country. The question I think we need to be asking is, why are we not seeing a bigger economic transformation being driven from that investment? Never mind the wages and salaries that people are bringing back into those communities too, which is far greater than this social grant investment, by the way. Why is that not triggering a greater kind of transformation in people's economic situations? I've got a hypothesis on this. And again, looking back in history, which was the brief I was given, in 1990, roughly 10% of food retail took place through large supermarkets. The rest took place through small enterprises, informal economy, and micro businesses. Today, then, the kind of big retail sector accounts for 75% of food retail in this country. And there's a kind of joke in the food community which goes around that says that ShopRite essentially has been the biggest beneficiary of the South African grants program. So this question about grants being paid, most of it being spent on food, the day that it comes in, it leaves again. And to me, there's a real need to think about a system to leverage our social grant expenditure better to drive economic growth and economic transformation at a grassroots level more effectively. These micro enterprises and small food economies, despite accounting for only 25% currently of food retail, create roughly 735,000 jobs, while the large retail sector, which accounts for 75%, creates only 250,000 jobs. So rand for rand spent on food, Small food enterprises generate 8 times as many jobs and keep money in circulation. And I think this is where we need to be putting a lot of our effort and putting attention as a community, thinking about systemic transformations around food, is how do we form a social compact that says we need to have a kind of rebalancing of this. I don't want to demonize the big supermarkets. You know, the Public Investment Corporation is a big shareholder, and if any of you have a kind of pension, fund invested anywhere, you're also a beneficiary of these supermarkets. But I do think we need to rebalance this. We need to be moving back from saying, we used to be 90% food retail and food businesses in our kind of towns and cities and country were run by small enterprises and businesses. And if we can get back to just 50% of that, we'll generate a huge number of jobs. We'll make sure that the social grant money that we're putting into communities is circulating at a local level for longer. So that's my first point. The second and last point is around coordination. So we've got 10% of our national budget essentially spent on food across a range of different departments in a range of different ways. There's not a single government official employed, for example, in the city of Cape Town, the same applies in most of our cities, whose job it is to wake up and think solely about food in a transversal, cross-cutting way. There's no official who I can go to as a city and say, what's the situation? There's the resilience department here has been doing amazing work trying to pull that together. We don't have a department of food, and I'm not saying we should have one, but I think we need to be coordinating our food efforts a lot more effectively. And I think, South Africa is hosting the G20 next year. Brazil has done exceptional work on this. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from Brazil in terms of this kind of transversal and multi-level governance on food. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. And as ICLEI, we're very grateful to be here and very open to collaborating further with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Luke, much appreciated. Some food for thought from at least the 4 members on stage, because the virtual contribution has since had to take her leave. That's the chairperson of the Commission for Gender Equality, that's Advocate Ndabiseng Mokhale. So we've got the 4 members on the panel just to offer concluding remarks. I do obviously want to take it to the platform, so I'm going to take 3, and I mean it quite literally, very quick questions, please. Are there, and there doesn't have to be 3 questions if there aren't 3 questions. If there are 3 very quick questions, okay, it seems like there are 2. I want to breathe very heavily down your neck. Prof. Madonsela said you've got 90 seconds, and I think I like that. 90 seconds, so you guys understand 90 seconds, instead of me just saying, I trust you to make it quick. You do have 90 seconds. I'm going to start counting from now. Please come through.
Good afternoon. The question that I asked it to Prof. Thuli, and she said that I should ask it to the panel. My name is Nothando Ndlovu. Although the keynote speakers, scholars and activists, politicians and delegates that were invited had so much impactful conversations and thought-provoking dialogues, in one of the parallel conversations that I sat on, and I dare say also in a majority of conversations that took place yesterday and today, I noticed that there is also a loophole that needs to be addressed. There was a speaker, and several speakers actually, that spoke of the diversity of fields in collaboration towards the goal of zero hunger and social justice. They pinpointed concepts that have significant relevance towards the achievement of these goals, such as compassion, empathy, equality, inherent dignity, and giving power to the marginalized, and so on. However, a profession that is founded upon and exists on these core values and principles, social work, is kind of absent in the room. The voice of society is often heard by most social workers who are mostly on the ground and living in these communities that these goals need to be implemented in. So my question is, or rather a suggestion, I think it would be more effective to seek also the input of social workers and also to involve them in the conversations and bringing about sustainable solutions in fighting the hunger crisis along with other ventures of social justice that contribute to poverty. There are currently around 10,000 unemployed social workers, and there's us who are coming into the field who want to be active in the move for social justice, who can take up being part of this conversation in planning, implementing, and giving you guys feedback, because that is exactly what you need to make sure that this actually works. The suggestions that you're coming up, we know exactly where it needs to go. We know what happens because we are in the community. So I am asking, when are you bringing us to the table? Because we have valuable input. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Social anxiety. Molweni, my name is Lisa Kanyambitimbiti. This is more of a statement more than a question. So I feel like we're setting sustainable goals in a system that is not sustainable itself. A system with a lot of extractive institutions that affect our people based on the color of their skin, gender, and social class, etc. Now, this is the path dependence from colonial rule and apartheid systems, right? And I feel like the transition from apartheid to post-apartheid, there wasn't much really a difference. Now, I feel like the problems, or sort of like the solutions we proposing to the House at large, they don't really address the roots of the problem, which is will always be, we know we've been addressing it, and people have been repeating the roots, the sources, the effects, and the solutions, right? So, but in the midst of all the darkness, right, there is beauty, and my name is Isakanya, so I'm forced to see the light in the dark. So it's people like Mamutuli Madonsela with the social justice system, Summit, people like Francisca Dako with the soup kitchens, selfless individuals who've been coming here and actually addressing these problems, the NPOs and everything, who actually give us a sense of hope for the future, right? That one day, maybe one day, just a tiny bit of hope that marginalized people, people of color, women and children of the country, globally, one day they will actually stop surviving and finally leave. So that's more of like a statement more than a question. Thank you.
We are just about done now, so I'm going to take this microphone and just literally hand it to Professor Madonsela, and it's going to go all the way to Dr. Metelerkamp, who will be our last contributor on this segment. Thank you very much. So these are the closing remarks as well as responses to some of the comments that our fellow attendees have offered. Prof.
Thank you, Program Director. Notando, thank you for bringing up the issue of social workers. One organization that we collaborate with as a chain, Social Justice, is the Tuma Foundation, which has been with us at every symposium and in every summit, except this one, unless they are participating online. And the Tuma Foundation is part of a project that we are supporting called Siyazakela Enterprising Communities, which is about creating self-sufficient communities where production is localized, or at least aspects of production are democratized. They believe that there should be a social worker in every ward. They also believe that there should be an agricultural support worker in every community. So we do agree with you. From our side, if we're talking about impact, for example, if we're talking about anticipatory impact, we can only do that when we can clean up the data, because we'll get data from Stats SA, but to verify the data, that the number of people who are hungry in Ward 16 in Stellenbosch are this number, and why are they hungry? Is it because they're single mothers, or is it because they're sick, or is it because they are unemployed, or is it because their businesses were killed by the lockdown? That information is easy to verify if there are people on the ground. Of course, that doesn't mean you speak for them. That means you link us and you tell us where we should go. So certainly having social workers as part of our solution is something we will recommend to government. The weird thing is that there are many social workers in our country. Some of them are unemployed, and I've interviewed a social worker in a Women Ready to Lead thing. We do also need the extension workers in agriculture, because if you want sustainable agriculture, in a country where people were demobilized from their ability to farm for themselves, if you're going to reintroduce farming, then you need competent extension workers. The last thing is, it was a comment, I just do agree with you that the right to food requires all of us to have our hands on deck. And from the Chain Social Justice Program Director, I would say what I hope is going to be an outcome from here is, number one, a commitment that social justice is a human rights issue, It's not an issue of charity. The social justice of eating is a human rights issue and therefore an obligation. And that obligation rests on government and the rest of us. With the rest of us, people keep thinking about government. Paying somebody less than they deserve is a violation of social justice under various ILO conventions. So there's a lot we can do without government intervention. We just have to look at ourselves. What can we do? The second thing that I hope we will agree to when we leave here is to support the SRD grant. My colleague Nick is at the forefront of that, where Nick and I still need to sort out our approaches. From an Ubuntu point of view, I believe that everyone in society has to contribute something. I just gave the Russell Portman lecture 2 years ago, where I was saying, in Ubuntu, yes, there has to be distribution, fair distribution, including based on human solidarity. But you can't give to people who are able-bodied without expecting some kind of contribution to society. And I think that is in line with Amartya Sen's concept of social justice. So we need to talk to that. And I know Nick thinks, okay, that's forced labor. But just from Ubuntu point of view, humans were never meant to be fed. They were meant to be part of a vibrant community where we help each other. So Ubuntu is based on reciprocity. So, but I do want us to support the SRC grant and its expansion. Lastly, I would like to see us supporting the people who have argued that the right to food should start from pregnancy to old age. And they've asked that we should do something about support to mothers. And then lastly, Mark Hayward has suggested that we pledge that we're gonna be an alliance against hunger or something like that. I don't know if somebody's here from Mark Hayward. When we speak finally, we should just talk about that. The idea being that if we just focus on food for the next 12 months, we can make a huge difference for broader social justice. Thank you.
Just the comment on social workers, I just want to 100% agree. In the context of the work that I do, it's abundantly clear that the causes of homelessness are many, but often it relates to family distress and family infighting, and also just a lot of the social ills that come with living in poverty. And so it's not just about access to a home. Often when you go to a shelter, the approach is reintegration. Let's reintegrate homeless people back into the families where they left, without looking at the severe dysfunction that caused them to leave their homes and live on the streets. And so an awareness of the broader social development dynamics involved in communities and the push factors of homelessness is absolutely key. So I just want to 100% agree, and thank you for raising that.
Thank you. And also just to build on the agreement that indeed we should be thinking about social workers amongst all other people that are working at the forefront of dealing with multiple sustainability challenges. So I just want to emphasize from our perspective as the Center for Sustainability Transitions, this is something that we actually hold as a core in our work as researchers, which is to work from a transdisciplinary approach, which is working with people that are actually on the ground, that know what the problem is and also know what the solution is. So we're really moving towards a more research and evidence-based sort of approach where we co-lead and collaborate with you as social workers, but all other people, into finding the solutions that we actually need for sustainability challenges. So I really appreciate that you raised this at this point, because I think at times as researchers, we also need that reminder. And I know someone did mention something about us always focusing on just pushing out papers. But when we have those provocations, then we also go back and reflect on what is my work actually doing? Is it pushing papers, or is it actually making a difference and giving others a platform to do better? Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, again, just picking up on your social workers comment, I completely agree. And I think linking to my comment about Brazil earlier, kind of social work and the kind of social departments have been at the core of coordinating their cross-cutting efforts on food. And I think there's something to be said for that and something to be learned from that. I think the other point, I mean, there's been mention made of extension workers, but if we're thinking about the urban dimensions of food, I think the local economic development officers across this country are the urban extension workers in a way of our system. And in addition to the community healthcare workers and social workers, I would add the local economic development officers to that kind of network that we need to be really seriously engaging if we're going to be making a dent on this urban dimension of hunger in South Africa.
Thank you very, very much, colleagues. That is the end of this particular session, and has become customary. The gift bags can only be handed over and